want to welcome everyone. And we usually start our program. We're going to be hearing from our guest today, who the Reverend Daniel Tamm. He is a deacon of the Episcopal Diocese of LA, and he serves low income and impoverished people by organizing housing, economic, environmental, and climate justice advocacy. And we're also going to hear from our own board member, Anthony Manousos, who is also co-founder of Making Housing and Community Happen. And they're going to be speaking today on two ballot measures, Proposition 33 and Proposition 5. I did want to point out that ICUJP is a nonprofit and 501c3, and we can comment on propositions, but not candidates. So we have not taken a position on propositions, but we have invited the two speakers to come forward and talk about, I believe it's Prop A. Yeah, Rick, go ahead.
That's what I was going to mention, Measure A.
Measure A, yes. So they are going to be speaking on yes on A, affordable housing on the ballot. And I also want
just to be clear, I'm actually going to talk about 33, 34, and 5.
33, 34, and 5. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of confusing ballots, and so it's great to sort them out today. So I also want to remind everyone on the email that you received, the invite to attend this meeting today. It also shows several ways you can donate so we can continue putting on these programs, and you will see links also to other programs we've done in the past, our awards ceremony we did recently, the Regis Awards at the Holman Church last month, where we honored people that have served our community, and we want to keep it going, so we encourage you to donate. Rick, if you can tell us a bit about next week's forum.
Sure. So as you know, ICUJP has taken up various topics of note, and I think one of the great things is all of this comes under the rubric of religious communities must not be blessing war and violence. And we've been having somebody join us for the last few months that's talked about some work that they've done. So next week, we're going to have Don, who's on the screen right now, talk to us about the work that he's doing with a group in Santa Cruz about the overall topic of toxic masculinity, which I'm sure we'll get into other things. So Don, if you'd like to elaborate, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's a group called Men Overcoming Abusive Behaviors that it spun out of the 12-step group, AA, about 15 years ago. And I've been a member of this group for about, I guess it came out 12 or 20 years ago. I've been a member for about 15 years, and it kind of fell apart during COVID, and I picked it up and started it up again. And it's just a peer group of men who are trying to overcome abusive behaviors towards our community, towards our spouses, towards our kids, and we're trying to teach that nonviolent way to passing it down to our kids and trying to keep marriages together. Kind of stressful because, as men, I wasn't really taught about how to act to my wife and how to be a good dad and stuff like that. And we got all sorts of people that come through it. It's, right now we have two guys that are out of the penitentiary. They're trying to keep themselves from getting the third strike. So they come and learn how to express their anger in a healthy way. That's about it.
All right, great. Well, thank you. Are there any ICUJP reports? Okay, with that, then I am going to go ahead and go to Steve Rohde, who will be giving our reflection today.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I was born on October 18, 1944.
Wow.
I'll be celebrating my 80th birthday next Friday. That's by way of the opening of my reflection and also an apology to Don and to ICUJP. I will not be joining you next Friday. September 11, 2021, 23 years ago, I was 57 years old. Those 23 years represent almost a quarter of my life that has been wrapped up in ICUJP. It has been the center of my activism, and it has been a natural outgrowth of the 2/3 of my life preceding it. Looking back in a recent biographical essay, I realized that my professional life and my activism has, from very early on, been based on defending the First Amendment, and then more broadly defending civil liberties and civil rights. When I was in law school and passed the bar exam, I had to go to a character interview in New York City. And at my interview, I was questioned on my political beliefs because the New York Police Department had surreptitiously photographed a petition I signed on a bulletin board at Columbia Law School supporting the End the War mobilization. This meant the police were secretly, in plain clothes, photographing petitions, identifying signatures, collating those into the state bar records. And I was being questioned about my political beliefs in my character interview. I survived that interview, and I wrote to the law school newspaper. I told that story. The National Lawyers Guild contacted me. They said they were in the midst of preparing a lawsuit against the New York Police Department for infiltrating and invading people's political rights. And the lawsuit I was a part of succeeded in getting a consent decree that is in effect to this day, limiting and restricting what the NYPD can do to avoid violations of constitutional rights. So it was natural as I led my career and raised my family to confront these kinds of issues. I once wrote an essay that explained this, and I said, I've been drawn to defending nonconformists, dissenters, iconoclasts, and people who hold unorthodox and unpopular views. At that time, I represented 2 Venice boardwalk performers who spoke out at an LA City Council meeting using acerbic and profane language. And in winning that case and upholding their rights, the U.S. District Judge wrote that my clients may be gadflies to those whose views are contrary to theirs. But First Amendment jurisprudence is clear that the way to oppose offensive speech is by more speech, not censorship, enforced silence, or eviction from legitimately occupied public spaces. Citing Plato, he wrote that, quote, a city that silences a critic will injure itself as much as it injures the critic. For the gadfly's task is to stir into life the massive beast of the city, to rouse each and every one of you, to persuade and reproach you all day long. ICUJP has been persuading and reproaching all day long for these 23 years. Early in that work, I had my first grandchild, who's now 21 years old. She invented a wonderful special name for me, different from that other grandfather. She called me Peepaw, and every one of my 4 grandchildren now call me Peepaw. And early in my civil liberties work after 9/11 and the war on terror and the terrible assaults on civil liberties, when I would speak publicly for ICUJP and the ACLU and other groups, I would end a lot of those speeches by saying, someday, my by then 2 grandchildren are going to come to me and they're going to ask, Peepaw, what did you do back then? I now have 4 grandchildren. Pete is 6 and Hank is 3. I expect them to ask me someday, Peepaw, what did you do back then? I think I have to be able to answer their questions, not just for them, but for the grandchildren and the children in this country and across this world. I think we all have to answer that question essentially. What did you do back then? We are in the midst of answering that question every week at ICUJP and in all the extraordinary work every one of you does outside of ICUJP. Finally, I was just in Turkey and Greece and Crete and the islands of Rhodes and Cyprus. And the biggest lesson I came away is that civilizations come and go. There is no guarantee of any civilization, any democracy, from succeeding and existing forever. And I thought deeply about that as I returned to the United States to think about this election in November. Many people have whistled past the graveyard as their democracies and civilizations were dismantled by fascism and authoritarianism. I'm very grateful for this group. I'm grateful for all the people I've met on this pathway. I am also filled with hope because of what each of you mean to me, what each of you stand for, and what each of you do every day in the cause of justice and peace. I think in a broader sense, we need to expand our slogan. People of the world must stop blessing war and violence. I've got some family and friends coming here for my birthday next week. The theme of my party is holy shit, we're alive. So I believe each of us feel that. We should feel that when we wake up every day, when we put our head on the pillow. Do something for peace and justice, because holy shit, we're alive. Thank you very much.
That was great, Steve. I think that was one of our better reflections, and so tell
You know, I need to get that hat for when I play pickleball next time.
it looks like iced tea. So okay, great. That's got to be one of the best of reflections, Rick, if you do a compilation at the end of the year. So we're a little bit behind time, and I'm sorry I went out of order because I already introduced our guest, and since then we've had more people join. So I'm just going to do a very short introduction of them again. We have Anthony Manousos, who is our ICUJP board member, and we also have the Reverend Daniel Tamm, who is an is a deacon at the Episcopal Diocese of LA. And today they're going to be talking to us about affordable housing on the ballot. There's several props, and also they want to talk to us about voting yes on Measure A. And I'll repeat again what I said earlier. ICUJP is a nonprofit, a 501c3. We can comment on propositions, but we do not endorse candidates in elections. And so we have not taken also position on any propositions, but we are here to discuss these props today on affordable housing. So with that, I will turn it over to our speakers.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you very much. And Steve, I so value our relationship and connections over the years, and to hear your perspective on your 80 years is a gift of God this morning. So thank you for that. And I think a new political movement is probably getting underway. It's called the HSWA. Holy shit, we're alive. Political movement, and I sign me up. So I've been invited here to speak about Yes on A, but Measure A, but to also give a little background on the coalition that it came out of. You may remember Measure J, which sought to put community care first, incarceration last. That was a coalition with some other neighborhood justice organizations, United Way, and a whole bunch of housing policy experts and housing justice advocates. And then ULA, which last year or the year before, it's all a blur now, the city measure to fund affordable and permanent supportive housing. Those were a pair of major victories that this coalition came out of. And we're basically a coalition of nonprofits, community advocates, and people like you know, who are, working to address the rise in homelessness by improving housing policies and creating affordable housing, and trying to bridge the gap between aspiration and having a meaningful impact. It's the ongoing struggle about that. And Measure A, you may recall Senate Bill 679, which went through several reiterations, several iterations before it finally landed with finally State Senator Sidney Kamla-Gerdove picked it up the mantle of leadership with that through the state legislature, and we continued to work with her and strived and advocated, showed up in Sacramento, and got it through. And it was signed by what's his name? Yes, Governor Gavin Newsom. Sorry, Gavin. And in order to be able to go ahead and put this initiative on the ballot. It's a new citizen-led housing initiative, out of recognition that high housing costs are the biggest cause of homelessness in Los Angeles. Let me say that again. High housing costs are the biggest cause of homelessness in LA County. And this measure aims to create more affordable housing and provide mental health and substance use services to thousands of vulnerable people, and provides built-in accountability and public oversight to guard against wasteful spending. I'm going to so that's those. I just shared with you the essential messages of Measure A. More homes we can afford. I'll say right off the bat, this is a half-cent sales tax, which is striving to bring the resources that are commensurate with the scale of the crisis. And that's what it is, a crisis. More homes we can afford. The measure is going to address the root cause of our housing crisis by greatly increasing the supply of affordable, quality, and safe homes. Something that was not given nearly enough attention previously, or the attention was coming from disparate sources, was mental health care. And Measure A embraces that and seeks to respond significantly. The measure will expand access to mental health care. It's going to provide resources for addiction treatment and other critical services immediately to support people in crisis, and then once they're housed as well. And then more results on homelessness. Completely missing from previous attempts to respond to the crisis was accountability. This measure guarantees accountability by requiring homelessness programs to reach specific goals with strict independent oversight and audits as well. There's about 3% of the budget that is devoted to that. So here we are with this is evident. We've not invested enough in preventing homelessness. We are more than 500,000 units short of affordable housing. We take a comprehensive approach, which means rather than 88 separate plans from every city in LA County, there'll be one comprehensive approach, so that we can have accountability, so that we can marshal the resources and allocate the resources necessary for building more affordable housing and for offering vastly more mental health care. And then more housing we can afford, more mental health care, more sustainability. Here's what's at stake. The idea is to repeal and replace Measure H before it sunsets at the end of 2026, to do it now. And if we don't pass this, Measure H will sunset, and more than 50,000 people will immediately lose supportive services and care which represents about a 28% increase in homelessness almost right away. What will the measure do? So here's what we discussed: expanding mental health care treatment, making housing more affordable, preventing homelessness. Preventing homelessness, we've been engaged in right to public counsel, right to counsel. We've been engaged in that effort, and this is incorporated into this as well. If people are facing eviction, but before they're facing eviction for lack of payment of rent, there's about 5 times the amount of emergency rental assistance that's being offered, to be able to keep people in their homes. And, discussion about this, and we'll probably get to this later on, but we also need to be cognizant of something else that's lacking. And that's essentially an anti-poverty mindset that needs to be really built into the consciousness of all of us who live in LA County. And we can maybe get to that later. Preserve life-saving services, scale up. And the accountability portion is that there'll be resources devoted to scrutinizing the entire, how is the measure being implemented? How is it working? If there are programs that are not really performing, we look at it and find out why. We scrutinize the people running those programs and try to get to the answer. And if we can't get them to our satisfaction, or it doesn't look like this is going to work, we say thank you for your service, close it down, and move the resources to another program that is working fine. So this is a whole mechanism that was simply not present in any kind of affordable housing or homelessness effort through the county previously, and which is how we'll hold up. Yeah, and how specific goals, and this is legally required in order to be able to determine how work is progressing. And these are the legally required goals. And these are being hammered out right now. The metrics of all of this is being hammered out right now by the coalition and by something called the leadership table, which developed by community leaders, faith leaders, business owners, a whole raft of stakeholders from equally represented throughout the county, as well as elected officials who also get a seat at the table. It's not written by them, it's written by housing policy advocates and experts, but we'll hold our elected officials and everyone with this leadership table and the Citizens Oversight Commission, which will develop out of this, hold them accountable for this to work. So there's the allocation. I'll let you look at it yourself. There's the 3% for accountability. Never existed before. And there we are. Here are the people who are supporting. So you'll see, I don't know if you can read that, but you'll see among probably a lot of organizations that you're familiar with. My organization, Interfaith Solidarity Network, is among them. We signed on very early with Measure J and previous efforts because we identified housing justice and climate actions as 2 areas we really wanted to focus on. ACLU and I've come to know through working with many of these people how they're remarkable human beings, and they know their shit, and they have compassion, but not nothing syrupy about their compassion. It's just kind of a natural instinct that they seem to all have, and ferocity. They come to work with a ferocity of intention to end homelessness. And they have a sense of humor. So it's a lot of fun to do this. Sister Helen Pragine, who's very prominent in the abolishing the death penalty movement, when we were working on Yes on 34 back in 2012, I think it was, to end the death penalty. She we were in a meeting at one time in organizing, and she stopped the meeting and she looked at us and she said, "You're all so serious." She said, "Listen, you can work on justice and have fun. It's okay." So with that, I'm gonna just end it and say thank you.
I was just, Daniel, thank you very much. Also, I saw the Facebook, or at least on social media, you did an ad for Measure A. And I thought it was very telling to see the whole list of supporters and the whole list of people who were opposing, or not people that are opposing it, but organizations and groups and corporations that are opposing Measure A. So that's very telling for me, where this stands. So, but thank you for your work on this. This is awesome.
It's an honor. Thank you for giving me the time to share it with you.
But by the way, Making Housing and Community Happen is one of the supporters of Measure A. It's an excellent measure and much needed. Thank you, Daniel, for your excellent presentation. I'm going to talk about a couple of other propositions that relate to housing. I'd like to start with the Proposition 33, which relates to rent control and something called Costa-Hawkins. And then I'm going to briefly talk about 34 and 5. And all of those three relate to affordable housing. So let me share my screen. All right, so let me start by, there we go. So let me start by talking about Proposition 33. So Proposition 33 is called the Justice for Renters Act. And basically it says that the state may not limit the right of any city, county, or city and county to maintain, enact, or expand residential rent control. And it's essentially a repeal of Costa-Hawkins. I forgot to mention that our organization supported the rent control campaign here in Pasadena, and it was successful. And so what I'm sharing with you has been prepared by the tenants union here in Pasadena. As time goes on, rent control buildings will be torn down, essentially ending rent control regulation. So that's the problem with Costa-Hawkins. Rent control only applies to buildings built before 1995. And Proposition 33 would allow rent control to be on buildings after 1995. It bans rent control on condos and single-family homes, and Proposition 33 would allow rent control to apply to condos and single-family homes. So Costa-Hawkins was passed by special interests back in 1995 as a response to strong rent control ordinances passed in the 1980s, like Berkeley, West Hollywood, Santa Monica, etc. Costa-Hawkins was written by ALEC, the right-wing lobbying group. And so previous attempts to partially or repeal Costa-Hawkins lost. It was Proposition 10 in 2018 and Proposition 21 in 2020. By the way, here in Pasadena, both those propositions passed. And I think that was a good indication that Pasadenians had an appetite for rent control, and that's why it was able to pass 2 years ago here in our city after quite a extensive campaign, we got it to pass by about, I think it was 56%, 54% of the vote, even though our city council all opposed rent control, except for one member. So 230 million have been spent since 2017 to fight rent control in our state. So what would happen if Costa-Hawkins is repealed? Basically, local authorities could implement whatever kind of rent control they want, and it's purely optional. So it would depend on the city and its particular needs. And many current rent control laws would automatically expand to cover more units, depending on the specific language of those regulations. For example, here in Pasadena, our rent control measure, which is part of now our city charter, says that if Costa-Hawkins is repealed, all apartments in our city would be it would be under rent control. Right now, it's only apartments that were built before 1995. Rent increases between tenancies could be regulated, eliminating one of the biggest weaknesses of current rent control laws. So right now, we have, because of Costa-Hawkins, something called rent stabilization. So people who are living in apartments, if there's rent control in the city, that their rent can be capped at a certain percentage per year, maybe cost of living. But once they vacate, the landlord can raise the rent to market rate. So if a city decides to adopt a rent control measure that doesn't do that, it would be eligible under Proposition 33. So because of Proposition 33, it's possible for cities to have stronger rent control measures. So what do the opponents of Proposition 33 say? They say it could disincentivize new affordable housing from being built. Well, that's, in my view, only the case if we're talking about new construction. Construction 15 years or older, really builders wouldn't be disincentivized to build if rent control applied to buildings built 15 years ago or older. Proposition could eliminate homeowner and renter protections that already exist and could lead to overturning other state affordable housing laws. Well, it doesn't affect AB 1482, which is the so-called rent gouging laws that sets a limit of 10% on how much landlords can raise the rent per year. And also opponents say it could reduce home values and increase housing costs. I really don't understand that argument because it doesn't make sense. If it reduces home values, how can it increase housing costs? It's kind of a bogus argument. So let me just summarize what a yes on 33 would mean. Costa-Hawkins diminishes efforts to prevent evictions and stabilize rents. Costa-Hawkins limits the power of cities and counties to enact their own regulations. And a yes on 33 gives the power back to local authorities. And it eliminates the single greatest barrier to effect rent control and expands rent control coverage to many, many more units this is in Pasadena, but throughout the state. So here's the organizations that support Prop 33: the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, the Democratic Party, teachers unions, nurse associations, housing advocates, the County of Los Angeles, and pretty much most progressive and left-leaning politicians. The opponents are mainly landlords and realtors, obviously. The Republican Party, California Apartment Association, which spent $38 million to kill this measure, and the California Association of Realtors. So that's Proposition 33. I'm going to quickly go to the next one. This is Prop 34, which sounds really good. It says that we have rising healthcare costs, which are squeezing millions of Californians, and it would give California patients and taxpayers much needed relief, lower state drug costs while saving taxpayers billions of dollars. And So it sounds great. If you look at it, it also says Prop 34 stands to save taxpayers millions of dollars more every year by requiring the greediest healthcare corporation to spend at least 98% of taxpayer funds they receive through the drug discount program in California and directly treating patients. Well, that sounds good, but it's really a poison pill. It's the groups that are behind Proposition 34 are the apartment association and realtors and landlords. And they're really aiming to curtail the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which has been spending millions of dollars promoting affordable housing. And that's really what this bill is all about. And it's why it was opposed by the LA Times and many other groups. So I think it's a tricky one. If you don't know much about the background, it seems like a great bill, but it's actually designed to stifle affordable housing initiatives from being funded. So I'm going to end with Prop 5. This is a bill that relates to bond measures. Currently, to have local bond measures, you have to get a 66.7% approval. This is because of the work of groups like the Jarvis anti-tax people. This bill would require only a 55% voter approval. So bonds are used by counties and cities and special districts. They're repaid with interest, and that's how we fund a lot of capital improvements. And currently, it requires 2/3 of the voters. So we need affordable housing, and typically, housing is about 50% higher in our state than other states. We also need upgrades on local infrastructure, roads, hospitals, schools, etc. Prop 5 would lower the voting requirement again to 55% instead of 2/3. And it would apply to housing programs for low-income families, seniors, people with disabilities, veterans, and other groups. And it could be used to improve the infrastructure. Its fiscal effects would be that it would mean that, that cities could raise more money, and that would, of course, impact taxpayers who have to pay it back, but they would have the choice of paying it back. Right now, a minority of 33% get to decide whether a bond gets passed. This would be a basically majority rules. And again, the supporters say it doesn't really raise taxes. It gives local voters more autonomy to address the unique housing and infrastructure needs of their own communities. And qualifying bond measure would have strict accountability provisions, much like Measure A, ensuring the funds are appropriately spent in the jurisdictions that approve them. Opponents are saying that this was written by politicians to push up the cost of infrastructure. And again, the opposition is that it would cost more money to taxpayers. So who opposes it? Same people who opposed the last two measures, the realtors, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association, and various other business groups. And it supported Prop 35. Prop 5 is supported by the California Democratic Party, the Building Trades, AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and the California State Association of Counties. So those are the ballot propositions. I'm going to stop my share. I hope that's helpful. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Yes, that was very informative. I have my voter guide right here making notes on it.
I want to ask for the endorsement of ICUJP.
Well,
And if you can, your questions can come in the context of my request for the endorsement of ICUJP, because it is really important that faith communities are visible on the line in support of more affordable housing and responding to the crisis of homelessness.
So Rebecca, if I may
Yes.
respond as chair,
Yes, please.
that request comes at a very opportune time. At 9:30, ICUJP is having its board meeting. We simply didn't have the bandwidth this year, given all the work we're doing on so many issues, to really give a conscientious analysis to all of the propositions. There are about 10 of them on the ballot, plus the local ones like yours. So perhaps we could have started earlier and had experts like you come in, but you've come in, you've made your presentation. I have some questions, but we will conscientiously take up these propositions at our board meeting at 9:30. And what little effect we can have with the election a month away, that's fine. But I think it's important, and I also respect people who ask for what they want. That's important in organizing. So thank you. And then when you're ready, Rebecca, I had my hand up.
Okay. All right then. So, okay, Steve, why don't we go with you and then I'll go next on the questions.
So, Daniel, as Anthony did, and I had this in my notes before he spoke, it is always good to look at the opposition. And is there any organized opposition to Measure A? And have there been any endorsements from any publications or anybody whose views we might consider?
Yes, endorsed by the LA Times, Habitat for Humanity, PATH, United Way, the LA County Democratic Party, the San Fernando Valley Young Democrats, the Democratic Party of the San Fernando Valley, the West LA Democratic Party. Every Democratic Party I went to, they endorsed. And just a raft of others. Habitat for Humanity and PATH are really respected in this field. And then United Way, of course, but ACT LA, ACLU, a community of friends, and the unions Ask Me, the Courage Campaign, Chrysalis, Community Coalition, very active in South LA, Homeboy Industries, topics. Let me see if I can, there's a whole, if you go to the website, yesona.la, you'll be able to see everybody, and Interfaith Solidarity Network is among them. Adam Schiff has endorsed Adele Andrade, Stadler, and I mentioned her only because she's out in Alhambra. And so Artie Kasakian, a Glendale city council member. So it's not just LA-centric people, it's people from all over the county, Santa Monica, West Hollywood, Chris Holden, the California Assembly member, Heather Hutt, the LA City Council member, Nithya Raman, my council member, Judy Chu, the congresswoman, Mike Eng, former assembly member, Rex Richardson, a wonderful mayor of Long Beach, and then of course Sydney Kamalager-Dove, U.S. congresswoman, and Sheila Kuehl, the former supervisor. I've just picked out a few among a whole bunch. I know that the Howard Jarvis Tax Association is against it. And honestly, as an organizer, I don't really pay too much attention to the opposition, or if it's saying something that's really hurtful, I pay attention then and respond accordingly. But otherwise, I keep my focus on lifting up the benefit to unhoused and low-income people. So because I have enough, I try to devote my resources of time and energy to that. There was one other thing I wanted to say about that, but now I can't.
Could I yeah, there is some skepticism about raising money to end homelessness because we haven't ended it. And a lot of money has been raised, and the argument is, well, we raised all of this money, and what do we have to show for it? Well, what we have to show for it is a lot of people have been housed. And I may get the numbers a little off, but it's something like 140,000 people have been housed thanks to Proposition H, the quarter cent tax. So it's actually been a very successful program. But the question is, if it's been so successful, why hasn't the number of unhoused people gone down? The reality is that there are more people coming into homelessness every year than are being housed. So one of the benefits of Measure A is homelessness prevention. How do we keep people from falling into homelessness? And that's through affordable housing, particularly for seniors and other people who are at risk. So this proposition takes into account this aspect of the problem, keeping people from falling into homelessness. Once they fall into homelessness, it's very hard to get them back rehoused. So I just wanted to say that's one of the arguments against it. The other is the Howard Jarvis argument. The taxes are bad, period. We don't need any more taxes. Thank you very much.
And there's going to be featured in this this agency that's going to coordinate. It's called La Casa, which stands for Los Angeles County Affordable Housing Solutions Agency. La Casa. It's going to be a new regional agency for affordable housing solutions, wholly dedicated to the issue. It's going to mandate, it's going to have the mandate to make housing more affordable for everyone in LA County. It brings leaders and cities together to produce more affordable housing. There's been no overall leadership on this issue, which is why we have Mayor Bass doing what she does in LA, the Board of Supervisors doing what they do, but no overall leadership for the whole county to attack the issue and to hold people accountable. La Casa has unprecedented authority to take action, like preserving affordable housing that already exists but is at risk of disappearing, and providing of the infrastructure and the innovation and funding necessary to make housing more affordable. This is different from Measure H in that this is drafted by experts, not politicians, and it prioritizes homeless services that have a proven track record of success. It's going to repeal and replace Measure H, and unlike previous initiatives, this measure requires those who are receiving funding, as I mentioned in the presentation, to hit specific goals of reducing homelessness with strict citizen oversight and independent audit. So it has things built into it that make it worthwhile, that make it worth the maybe $5 on an average per month that an average income taxpayer will pay. that it's the way we've worked out the funding is that that would be like maybe $2.50 per month for low income people. So everyone is paying for this. Everyone has a share in this, and and that's with the resources that are commensurate to the scale of the issue.
And
Thank
it's also a steady income stream. What we have now is every year Sacramento decides whether or not to fund homelessness, housing, and all of this on a yearly basis. So some years when the state has a lot of money, these funds are available, but not on a steady, dependable way. This would be a bill that would guarantee a steady income stream, and it wouldn't sunset. That will really help a lot of organizations plan, years ahead instead of just year by year.
And if the voters don't like it, they can change it. There's a mechanism for this to go to a vote if it feels like it's not working. So the people are not shut out of this process in terms of how it's working.
Thank you. I'll just comment. Yeah, I agree with Stephen and Rick. It's very telling when we look at these measures and propositions of who's supporting and who is not. And I see on Measure A that Mike Antonovich, the former supervisor for District 5 of the Board of Supervisors, he is an opponent of Measure A, which doesn't surprise me. I know that when he was supervisor, the practice of collaborating in his district between the cities like Lancaster and Palmdale, to collaborating with the sheriffs to remove the unhoused and relocate them out into the desert where they were exposed in the summer with no water. It was just heinous, in my opinion, and it's still going on under his successor, Catherine Barger. So yeah, but I think there's also some hesitation that this LA County Board of Supervisors, they're also responsible for the fact that millions of dollars that were supposed to be allocated for the unhoused had to be returned to the feds a couple of years ago because they didn't spend it or they didn't allocate it. But I'm encouraged to see the measure and be voting yes on it. My question, though, is on Measure 34. I see that the ACLU voting guide doesn't have it on their, on their list here. So it looks like they're not taking a position on it. So I wonder, Anthony, you had it in your presentation, if you can speak to it, because I also noticed that one of the opponents to it is Dolores, Huerta, as well as AIDS Healthcare Foundation. And do you know or have any sense of why there's, in the political realm here in LA, there seems to be a lot of attacks against AIDS Healthcare Foundation? In my opinion, they're doing great work and have been for decades. I started out volunteering for them as doing wills for some of their patients in hospice decades ago. And through the years, it just seems that they're just been under relentless attacks.
Well, yeah, I mean, they've been under attack largely from the real estate and landlords associations because they've been supporting affordable housing. And that's why this particular proposition is kind of tricky, because it has some good things in it, and then it has this poison pill. And it was deliberately designed that way so that voters would vote for it and in the process cut off a source of funding for affordable housing initiatives in the future.
Any idea why the ACLU didn't take a position on it?
I don't know. Yeah.
All right.
Hello.
So I see, yeah, Sophia has her hand up.
Yeah, well,
And then
there's
we'll go to Carol Francis.
I wanted to speak to like some of the critiques, and I know some of the conflicts with AHF go back with Weinstein and just the political infighting within the LA County Democratic Party, and there's bad blood that goes back years, and that's like really sordid. But the problem is that if you have federal housing guidelines, and so for communities like mine, there are people that are on the ground that don't support the measure because it actually promotes gentrification. And that's very important, and it's displacing people because you have Wiener's bills that came in and circumvented CEQA that said, you know, we're going to give you these low density bonus provisions where you can build as high as you want with no parking. And then you have where they can build along routes, just not trains and rails. It's literally where a bus route is. So you can build and go along a corridor where we have people slashing tires, saying you can't park in my parking spot. You have people driving around. They can't unload their groceries because there is no parking and it's become violent. So when we who have been historically redlined, it's the doubling down on segregation because we know by design, Skid Row was designed that way. The county and the city designed it that way. So they're building most of the affordable housing units in the city that were built in the 14th district. And these laws that were passed where they were supposed to build affordable housing in areas that didn't build one unit. That's what's happening. They're going to double down on segregation, and the most vulnerable communities are going to be impacted because these multinational developers, it's just not an LA thing. These are big firms hiding under LLCs. We don't know who owns them because we don't have a beneficial owner registry. So good intentions are great, but I follow the money and I follow how it's rigged against us. And so for us on the east side, we're fighting off people that come in and we've been doing it for years. They send the inspectors on you to take that little mom and pop house to knock down 3 or 4 houses and then build units that go up. And those nonprofits are funded by the same people promoting gentrification. And so there are no guidelines, and the gentrification comes because there's a list that says you cannot choose who's going to be able to live in that unit. So people that support it, they may see a unit going up and they can't even apply to get in. And then what the county uses, they use a racist way of looking at people's income. They count everyone in the family as the income. And so they're actually fudging on how much money it is each house is actually making in the census. So that is the way they manipulate the numbers. And then there's a whole other layer of things that happen in the barrios and the ghettos when it comes to you even turning in your application. They're making money on it, charging people who are so poor. And before you know it, you're applying and you're applying and you're applying. The only money you have because you're barely making it. And then they're making money off the application fee. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening at the bottom that I think what I call, neoliberals who are fascists, just as bad as the right wingers that don't care about anything but make money off the housing industry and that contractor. And you can see the stuff that goes up. When you see they're using wood, they're overpricing per each unit. And that contractor is making bank, and then they're going to use your money to spend, that contract somewhere else. So I'm just speaking what I lived. And for us, it's not favorable. And because we know what we're fighting. So I just wanted to share with the opposition to it. And there's other issues about AHF because they were called out as being slumlords. And, but there was also some rules because of it that kept them from, fixing up the place. But it didn't. Downtown, that really exploded. And BLM wasn't part of that, when they were exposing the problems with having them fix things on time and then not being fixed. And so you can't say you're supporting housing and then you're not fixing the problems inside the units that were really bad. So that's something I wanted to share with you guys. But I support.
And I do see too, Sophia's point here on Prop 34 that the Latino heritage of LA is supporting it. So it is a complex.
It's like I said, I look from a grassroots perspective. You can have an ideology or a philosophy, but when you put it into practice, what's been happening, and we see how affordable housing has displaced people. And I saw when they knocked on all the leasehold housing projects. I worked there. I worked at Proyecto Pastoral, and they never brought the people back that they promised. And they always say that they're going to bring you back, and they never do. That was occupation and displacement, a massive, longest urban Indian reservation west of the Mississippi, and they did not bring us back. So I don't,
the same practice. It goes back to Chavez Ravine when they removed mostly Hispanic, Latino communities.
Yeah, so that's
okay.
I mean, I support housing, but it's just the way the system is set up. People with good hearts and good intentions, when you have, these vultures coming around and they have their agenda that has nothing to do with helping the homeless. It's just about making money. Thank you.
We need watchdogs. We need watchdogs on these politicians. Okay, well, thank you, Sophia. Thank you for that input. Did you have a question, or can we move on to Carol Francis? Okay, I guess we'll move on to Carol Francis.
I think I need to say a little bit of something. So we deal a lot with affordable housing developers, nonprofits, and they're honorable people by and large. I wouldn't describe them in the way that they're being described here. There are greedy developers who are taking advantage of the system, but there are also some very conscientious people who are doing their best to provide affordable housing. And there are things in place, laws in place that are supposed to prevent displacement. There's supposed to be compensation for people who are displaced even temporarily from their housing, so that either housing could be renovated or replaced with affordable housing. All of those laws exist and they need to be enforced. And if they're not enforced, the community needs to fight to make sure that they are. But I just want to put it out there that that there are laws in place that are supposed to protect people from the kinds of abuses that Sophia rightly brings up. Thank you.
Okay, so gentlemen, thank you very much for that presentation. I think that some of us have come through the 60s and 70s, especially in political and community movements in Los Angeles, with the mindset of opposing rather than building programs. I think part of that is very, very well intentioned and very well researched because of the history of how certain communities have been treated in Los Angeles. Well, you can even go back to the 1940s, the war era, and what happened to young Chicano men in this, in this area. But the thing is, when it comes to something like Measure A, where they are working with La Casa, which is something that I don't think anybody would in this area would consider anything less than a really great organization that's doing some really good work, as a checklist, as a check on the efficiency of how this is going to work. I think that's something that very much needs to be considered as far as a positive here. That was one thing. The other thing that I wanted to say, and maybe the board members, when you guys meet later on, is to think about since we have done a lot of work in different aspects of working with the unhoused and in housing issues in Southern California, maybe it's time for us to take a look at something like a comprehensive, maybe one-day forum that will last a few hours on people presenting on different aspects of it, everywhere from the work that someplace like Safe Haven is doing at All Saints, to the work that Making Housing and Community Happen is doing with working with those religious organizations as for one aspect, to look at affordable housing on those the lands of religious communities, to some of the work that other organizations that we've had here have done, ICAR and other places. So I just want us to bear in mind something like that, because I think it's time. I think there's been a lot of work around the unhoused in LA, but not anything that's kind of brought everybody together to look at conscientious solutions going forward. And maybe that's one way that we can further the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Rick. Thank you for those comments. We'll definitely take them under consideration. So I know Steve wanted to ask a follow-up question. And Sophia, if you're done, can you put your hand down?
I put it up again.
Oh, you put it up again. Okay, so you can go after Steve.
Sure.
Thank you. This is such a fruitful conversation. I did want to weigh in that Bend the Arc political action wing has put out a voter's guide on all of the statewide propositions, and it aligns exactly with what Anthony has presented today on many propositions, but these specifically, yes on 33, no on 34. And I just wanted to take a moment. I know these things can be mind-numbing sometimes to track, because some of the corporate proposition manufacturers are very good at presenting propositions that appeal on their face to voters, but have much more sinister objectives. And Proposition 34 is an example of that. By the way, I sent around the Bend the Arc Voters Guide because it's not just a list of yes or no's. It's got deep analysis on each one of them. I'm proud to say that I worked on and wrote with others support for Prop 6, which should be a no-brainer for anyone in California who wants to end involuntary servitude. And people, I believe we even have do we have an upcoming program on involuntary servitude, Rick, and Prop 6?
That was actually back when you were on your Uzo tour. But it's been put up, and I'm adding those to the Facebook page as we go.
Good. So you got a good taste, I'm sure, of why it's important to vote yes on 6. But literally, let me take a few moments, because the Prop 34 is so manipulative that it takes a few minutes to see what the landlords have done. Federal law currently allows healthcare providers who serve low-income and at-risk patients to buy pharmaceuticals at a discount, which they can then sell at retail rates. So while the intent of this is for providers to use the profits to support patient care, neither state nor federal law restricts how those profits are used. This proposition would require organizations that spend at least $100 million on expenses other than direct care, and that also own and operate apartment buildings, and that have at least 500 severe health and safety violations in the last decade, to spend at least 98% of their net drug sale revenue on direct patient care. Now, that's a lot of conditions, and who would come up with that set of preconditions? Well, this ballot measure might make logical sense. It is, in fact, only relevant to one organization, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, that has, and it's been put forth by the California Apartment Association, which lobbies on behalf of the state's landlords. So the AIDS Foundation has become a major and sometimes controversial player in state and local housing politics, in part by using the profits they earn to support their advocacy work. The foundation housing advocacy includes rent control policies, including this year's Prop 33, which Anthony spoke to and which he and others support a yes vote on. So to conclude this Bend the Arc analysis, while Bend the Arc's values are aligned with some of AID's Healthcare Foundation, our opposition to 34 is actually related to issues of good governance. Regardless of AIDS Healthcare Foundation specific activities, it is challenging to support a proposition that was brought forward by a business interest, landlords, to attack the advocacy of one organization. And then, since it's Bend the Arc's a Jewish group, we ground some of our views on the Torah. You shall not have one standard of law for non-citizens and citizens alike. This measure sets up a dangerous precedent that those with money can buy propositions to attack their policy and political opponents. It's untenable to have a functioning democracy if we can buy our way out of hearing voices of those we do not agree with. Bend the Arc recommends opposing this position to send a message that advocacy cannot be silenced by the moneyed interests who oppose them. So I think we should take very seriously why Anthony made a presentation to oppose Prop 34. There is so much behind it. Bend the Arc's brief analysis tries to explain that. And I hope everybody will take a serious look at no on 34. Thanks for listening to all that.
Great, thanks, Steve. Yes, you reminded me. I went back and looked at that you had circulated that voter guide. It's confusing. So I'm glad we're taking a deep dive into this. So let's see. I think, Sophia, you had your hand up again. Are you still there?
Yeah, I just
see you
wanted
there.
the thing that I forgot to mention, which I think is very important, especially for all the faith-based groups, is that we saw in our community, we had just a devastation of what happened during COVID. Our nurses haven't been replaced, our doctors, our social workers. And, you know, we've been claiming genocide for years because of the freeways and Exide. And I've said it before, you know, we have areas that are highly contaminated and they're allowing them to build it. You know, Mr. Gonzalez is one of our most active members that's been fighting Exide. You know, he's stage 4, he's dying. And he's one of the main, you know, people that goes out and says, you know, we can't keep building these units, you know, dumping them on the east side when we're dying. If you move here, you're going to get sick just like us. And so understand, if you're going to build, they have to build the infrastructure in a community that's already under service. We saw the amputations. We saw people die because they couldn't get medical services and their appointments got pushed back. So why do they continue to build in underserviced communities? So just, I wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Anthony, you had your hand up again?
Yeah, I just
You can
wanted
speak.
to.
You're a speaker, so you can
Yeah,
just jump in.
I just wanted to affirm something that Sophia said, which is I really strongly support the idea of affordable housing being spread throughout the community and not just in low-income areas. And we've seen recently this situation in Norwalk where the city council passed an ordinance that would ban affordable housing and homeless shelters in their city. And they were immediately slapped down by the state because it was contrary to the housing element. And as a result, the state was going to revoke Norwalk's housing element, which would have allowed builders to build anything they wanted in their city. So the state is trying to make sure that every city, every municipality has its fair share of affordable housing and housing for those who are unhoused. The other thing that came up recently was the planning commissioners in Los Angeles were trying to figure out where to put 250,000 units of housing that needed to be built. And a Berkeley study said that the biggest problem is the fact that in 70 or 80% of the city, it's zoned for single family dwellings. And this is part of a legacy of racism and discrimination and segregation that goes back from the beginning of the century. So the Planning Commission actually tried to repress this study. The LA Times had to get a Freedom of Information Act to get a hold of the study. And the commissioners basically decided that any new housing, this 250,000 units, would be built in areas that are already zoned multifamily. In other words, communities like the ones that Sophia is talking about. What we strongly support is really ending single-family zoning. This has happened in Minneapolis. It's the first city that's done this. But I think that ending single-family zoning would help to spread multifamily apartment buildings throughout the city, allow affordable housing to be built throughout the city, and help to affirmatively further fair housing, which is a state as well as a federal law that needs to be strongly enforced. In other words, affirmatively furthering fair housing says you can't concentrate affordable housing in one area of the city, and you must spread it throughout the entire city. So I just wanted to put it out there that this is a very important issue. A lot of people who live in single family homes don't see themselves as part of the problem, but the study indicates that very much so, that by preventing multifamily housing in these areas that are high opportunity, they are perpetuating discrimination and racism and economic inequality. By the way, that's pretty controversial to say. I know in my city, actually one of the city council members or commissioners said, single family homes are sacred. And our mayor said, I don't want to see the shadow of a multifamily apartment touch a single family resident. So the municipalities are very, very protective of single family homes, but they're also, by doing so, preserving racial injustice and economic inequality.
I agree with you, Anthony, 100%. I mean, I live out here in Agoura Hills, and so I was part of the listening in on, our city council was voting on their housing plan, and they had to make sacrifice, mostly single family home. I live in a single family home, and we do have the unique concern here too, that we're also in the wildfire corridor. So, we, have to be aware of that to have, evacuation plan, and, that has to be figured in our house. But there are a lot of commercial buildings here that could be transformed, into housing. And that's what the city council undertook. And when they adopted their housing plan that met with the state requirements, they were sued by a local homeowners association in Old Agoura, where they're equestrian. These are like equestrian estate. Every house is equestrian, zoned. They didn't want anything with multifamily housing being close to their properties.
Rebecca, two new hands are up, Rebecca.
Oh, I didn't see that. I'm sorry. Okay, so we'll move on. I see Lucy.
Thank you, Rebecca, for taking my call. I would like to say that single-family homes provide gardens and lawns, which maybe I don't really like a lot because of the pesticides and so forth. But if we're going to add a lot more people, we're going to need green belts along with fire escapes. So I just wanted to bring that out. Thank you.
I agree.
Taking
Good point.
my comment.
And is there? Sorry, I don't see the other. Oh, Daniel. Yeah, Dan.
the thing about, I think what is deeply objectionable is the commodification of housing. That it's not about building homes, it's about building an investment for people to make money. Well, we look at it as we are building homes for people to live in and to create community throughout LA County. And that's one of the purposes of La Casa. La Casa is going to have unprecedented authority to take action for housing solutions, to mandate. They're going to have a mandate to make housing more affordable for everyone in LA County. And here's an important piece of it. It's bringing the leaders and the cities together to produce more affordable housing, preserve affordable housing more than we have now, and to support those at risk of losing homelessness. So those elected officials who are out there aggressively operating on behalf of, moneyed interests who want to commodify housing, they're going to have to contend with La Casa. They're going to have to go through, they're going to have to deal with, enforcement by an affordable housing solutions agency, which is vigilant about how housing is being built and the equity that it represents, and seeing that communities are not displaced.
Great. Thank you.
That's measure A.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted to say that I was at the city council meeting 3 weeks ago when De Leon introduced the Boyle Heights plan, and you talk to it right now, Rebecca, how they can repurpose, buildings. However, dollars within Black and Brown communities don't stay within the community. So when you have multinational corporations, and when I was there, I literally saw those maps that reminded me of Israel taking all over Gaza and taking over Palestinian land. When they put them up, they were designing what they were going to do to Boyle Heights. And what I looked at it is like, oh my God, they're going to take out the entire economic corridor. And not the people that are on this call who support affordable housing, which I support, low-income housing. I really am a proponent of public housing. But when you by design allow these international corporations to come in and strip mine our economic corridors or our manufacturing corridors, where will the men and women from our community work? They just can't build housing. And that's what's happening right now, because I look at it in a macro level. And so, I have no disrespect for anyone in this call. I support where your heart is, but I look at it's coming down, and it's not only happening here, it's happening all over the world, because these are the most rich in the world. These are the most powerful people. So when people say we're going to do mixed use, change the zone, you're going to have those vultures wanting to take those properties just to build housing and nothing else. And when we do community plans, the Eighth Health Foundation sued in the art district, and the judge said you have to follow the plan, but they're not following the plan. We're trying to save our parking lots in District 1, and the mayor comes in trying to use her power, saying we're going to take the parking lots and then build housing. But you know what? Now you're stripping us of our economic corridor, and then our businesses are going to cave because no one has anywhere to park to shop at our local stores. So when you change zones, they have to be around a community plan. But the way the state did it and said you could do routes, that's part of the problem. You can build around a bus route and have no parking, and then you have our stores going under because it's so huge. So I just wanted to also mention that. So thank you for listening.
Thank you for contributing that. And I think that aligns with what Anthony was saying. We have laws we have to enforce. If they're not following the plan, but they're violating other laws, then yeah, we have to keep our eye on them, and we have to hold them accountable.
Yeah, I want to say a thing about what we do in Pasadena. We have a local preference for any affordable housing that's built. And by affordable housing, I'm talking about housing that is 100% affordable, not inclusionary housing where 10 or 15 or 20% may be affordable. But for any affordable housing project in our city, 20% of the labor has to be local, 20% of the contractors have to be local, and 20% of the materials have to be purchased locally. That's a requirement if the project has gotten any city funding. And almost every affordable housing project in our city gets at least a couple of $1 million from the city. So in this situation, affordable housing projects typically are $40–50 million by the time they're completed. And a percentage of that money actually goes back into the community. So that's a really good law. And I think that other cities should implement laws like that. It's legal to do it, and it's necessary to do it. And I also need to say that any affordable housing project has to pay prevailing wage, which is equivalent to wages. That's one of the reasons why the per unit cost of affordable housing is higher than market rate. Okay. So those are some things about affordable housing that I think need to be kept in mind. And when I talk about affordable housing, I'm specifically talking about 100% affordable. And then as far as the displacement, again, we have laws in place that require one-on-one replacement. If you have either naturally occurring or affordable housing and it's torn down, it has to be replaced with an equivalent number of units. And the people who are displaced are supposed to be paid enough money so that they can move back into the affordable units once they're constructed. That's the law. That may not be enforced in certain areas. And if it's not, the community has to rise up and insist that the laws are enforced. But there are some good laws out there. They just need to be implemented.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. We're running late. I just want to throw out one thing, and then I'll get to you, Daniel. In these discussions, especially in LA County, I remember a few years ago, the director of animal control was directed to participate in discussions about affordable housing, multi-unit housing in LA County, to design them so that people can have pets too. We know a lot of people that are living on the streets won't go into shelters if they can't take their pets. But when we're looking at permanent housing, we got to accommodate people who want to have pets. And I don't think that's happening, that she's participating in it. But I'd like, hopefully you guys that are working in the trenches on this will make sure that happens. I'm talking about dogs and cats as pets, to be able to keep dogs and cats in these units, not just goldfish and gerbils. So
one brief comment about my request for endorsement for Measure A. When you consider this, I want you to consider, what does endorsement mean? Yes, we'll be proud to say Measure A is endorsed by interfaith communities united for justice and peace. That means a lot. But I want you to also consider your willingness to volunteer for Measure A, to talk to voters. When I talk to voters, when I ask, have you ever heard of Measure A? So many people, those who stay on the line, so many people say, no, I've never heard about it. And all you need is like 30 seconds of a positive message to plant in people's minds. And they go away, if not saying, oh, yeah, great, or, oh, I didn't know that, thank you. They're going to go look at their ballot, and they will have had planted in their minds a positive message about Measure A. That is the value of speaking to voters. So I want you to consider that. Thank you.
Great.
Rebecca, I just want to say that Daniel and Anthony are already card-carrying members of ICUJP. We have renewed and punched your card. And finally, I want to go beyond what Daniel just said. This isn't about making a vote on one day of the year on November 5. And what ICUJP has learned over the years, this struggle against houselessness and homelessness is year round, because the cruelty and the struggle is year round. So in addition to making these votes and volunteering, as Daniel says, it's really to sustain the work, because we've passed other housing measures and we've raised other money. And a lot of our politicians have sat on their hands and sat on the money. So it's a sustained, it is a sustained struggle. And I say that because that ICUJP understands that in so many venues and on so many issues. And we devoted 2 years ago, our Regus awards event was Housing is a Human Right. And we understand that. So we've got to make it a habit consistently to support these issues. Voting is necessary, but not sufficient to end homelessness.
Right. Don't take your eyes off them. Hold them accountable. So, okay. Thank you, everyone, for this great program. And we encourage you to come back next week for more dialogues like this.